The room was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft, warm light over the well-dressed guests who moved gracefully around the hall. There was a sense of wealth and elegance that seemed almost tangible, like a fabric stretched over everything in the room. Among all this beauty and sophistication, she moved quietly, carrying trays filled with sparkling drinks, careful not to spill a drop. Her uniform was simple and unassuming, a stark contrast to the designer dresses and tailored suits that surrounded her. She kept her head low, her movements precise and practiced, like a dancer who had rehearsed the same steps thousands of times. People saw her as just another server, another invisible figure moving through the crowd. No one stopped to look at her face or notice the faint smile she wore as she worked. But inside, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement, a feeling she often experienced when stepping into new places, where she wasn't fully known. She had been working at events like this for a while, but every time she entered a room filled with people who seemed untouchable, there was a small, quiet tension that ran through her. It was a familiar sensation, a combination of humility and longing. She wondered what it would be like to be seen for more than just her job, to be noticed for her talents instead of her uniform. Yet, she also knew that for now, her role was simple. Keep moving, keep serving, and keep silent as she passed a group of guests, laughing over a shared joke. She caught a glimpse of the grand piano in the corner of the room. It was polished to a high shine, the black and white keys gleaming under the light. She stopped for just a second, almost unconsciously, letting her eyes linger on it. Memories of her childhood, of countless hours spent practicing, came rushing back. Her fingers itched to play, to feel the keys under her touch, to let the music flow. But she quickly shook her head and moved on, reminding herself that she was here to serve, not perform. The guests continued to talk around her, some discussing business deals, others sharing stories of travel and luxury. She walked past them, offering a polite smile, careful not to make eye contact unless necessary. She had learned over the years that invisibility could sometimes be a shield. When no one notices you, no one can hurt you. Or so she thought. But there was a part of her that longed to break through that invisibility, to let people see who she really was, carrying another tray. She paused for a moment by the piano again. She noticed a man standing near it, looking at her with a slight smirk. He whispered something to his companion, and she felt the weight of judgment settle on her shoulders. The words weren't loud, but she caught enough to know they were laughing at the idea of a server being anything more than that. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to push the discomfort down. She had learned to do this a long time ago. The world was full of people who judged without knowing, who assumed without asking. She had learned to move past it. Still, the piano called to her. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a reminder of who she was beneath the uniform, beneath the trays of drinks and polite smiles. It represented her dreams, her hours of dedication, her silent victories in a world that often ignored her. She longed to sit down, to close her eyes, and to play the music that lived inside her. But she also knew the risk. What if she was laughed at? What if she was asked to leave? The thought made her pause. But the longing was stronger than the fear. As she moved through the crowd again, she noticed a few people glancing at her more than usual. Noticing, judging, perhaps wondering what she was thinking. She kept her focus on the tray, but her mind wandered to the piano again. She imagined the first note, the sound echoing through the hall, the surprise on the faces around her. The thought made her heart beat faster. It was a dangerous daydream, one that could either lift her higher or crush her completely. A guest asked for another drink, and she approached with a practiced smile. Her hands moved deftly, pouring the champagne without spilling a drop. She handed the glass to the guest, their eyes barely meeting hers. "Thank you," they said politely, but without warmth. She nodded and moved on, feeling a pang of longing for acknowledgement. For someone to see her for who she was, not just for what she could carry. In a quiet corner, she paused once more. The piano seemed almost alive, its polished surface reflecting the room in miniature. She imagined herself sitting there, fingers dancing across the keys, the music filling the space. silencing the chatter, commanding attention. The thought was intoxicating, but she reminded herself again. She was just the server. Her job was to move, to smile, to blend in. And yet, a small voice inside whispered that maybe today could be different. She shook the thought away and continued her rounds, moving gracefully between guests, keeping her composure. But every step she took was shadowed by the piano, by the possibility of what might happen if she allowed herself to be seen. The tension inside her built slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. The feeling of holding back a part of herself that demanded release. As the evening progressed, the room seemed to grow louder, the music from a nearby string quartet mingling with the chatter. She moved with the trays, but her eyes kept drifting to the piano. Each time someone laughed or whispered, she felt a small sting, a reminder of the invisible walls between her and the world she longed to reach. Yet with each glance at the piano, her courage grew a little. The desire to play was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a need, a calling that could not be ignored, carrying a tray of sparkling drinks. She noticed the host of the event making his way through the crowd. He paused near her, chatting briefly with another guest, his eyes scanning the room. She wondered if he had noticed her, if he knew there was more to her than a uniform and a polite smile. She reminded herself not to hope too much. Hope could lead to disappointment, and she had learned to guard her heart. Still, she couldn't help but imagine the possibilities. If she could play just one song, if she could let the music speak for her, maybe, just maybe, the world would pause and see her. She imagined the surprise, the admiration, the recognition that had always been just out of reach. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, both thrilling and terrifying. As she moved to serve another guest, her hands steady and her smile in place, she felt the tension in her chest growing. The piano was no longer just an object in the room. It had become a symbol of her hidden self, of everything she had worked for in silence. She longed to reach out, to touch the keys, to let the music tell her story. But the fear lingered. What if she failed? What if the laughter returned, louder and more cruel than before? And yet the thought of standing silent, unseen, invisible for the rest of the night felt unbearable. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, feeling the weight of the trays, the heat of the room, the eyes that didn't notice her. And in that moment, she made a quiet decision. One small step could change everything. One moment could transform the invisible into the unforgettable. She didn't know exactly how it would happen, or what the consequences might be, but she felt a flicker of courage, a spark of something that had been buried for too long. The music called to her again, soft but insistent, like a whisper that grew louder with every heartbeat. She kept moving, serving drinks, navigating the crowd, but inside, she felt the beginning of something new. The invisible world she had known so well was about to change. She could feel it in every nerve, every breath, every quiet longing that had been building for years. Tonight was different. Something was about to happen, and she was ready. Even if no one else knew it yet, the room had settled into a rhythm, filled with the soft hum of conversation and the occasional laughter that seemed louder against the background music. She moved among the guests, carrying trays with precision, her uniform crisp, her expression polite but reserved. She had become almost invisible, a shadow among the brightness of the event. Every step was measured, every gesture controlled. Yet beneath the surface, a storm of emotions was quietly growing. Earlier in the evening, she had noticed the piano more than once. Its presence had been subtle at first, but now it called to her with an intensity she could no longer ignore. She remembered the hours she had spent as a child, sitting at a worn instrument in a small room, fingers moving over the keys, learning melodies that seemed to flow from her very soul. Those days had been filled with struggle and solitude, yet they had shaped her in ways that nothing else could. Every note had been a conversation with herself, every melody a story of perseverance, hope, and quiet triumph. But tonight was different. Here, in this grand room, among people who barely acknowledged her, the piano stood like a silent challenge. She imagined what it would be like to play, to let the music speak where words could not. The thought sent shivers through her, a mix of fear and exhilaration that made her heart beat faster. She had always known that performing in front of strangers was daunting, but tonight, the idea was no longer a dream. It was a need she could not ignore. As she passed a table, a group of young women laughed at something one of them had said. One of them glanced at her, eyes narrowing slightly, and whispered something to her friends. She caught the tone, light but mocking, and felt a familiar sting in her chest. People often assumed she was nothing more than a server, someone who existed only to take orders and move quietly out of the way. It was a reality she had accepted long ago, but it still hurt in ways she could not fully suppress. She moved on, pouring champagne for a tall man who barely glanced in her direction. "Thank you," he said, his voice polite but detached. She nodded, her smile practiced and calm. Inside, though, she felt a flicker of defiance. One day, she thought, they would all see more than the uniform, more than the trays she carried. They would see her talent, her heart, and the music that lived within her. The piano drew her gaze once more, its polished black surface gleaming in the soft lights. She imagined running her fingers along the keys, feeling the familiar resistance, the precise sound of each note. She imagined the melody rising, filling the room, commanding attention in a way that words never could. The idea was intoxicating, yet terrifying. What if she failed? What if they laughed at her? The fear lingered, but it no longer felt strong enough to keep her away. A guest, noticing her pause, raised an eyebrow and whispered to another, making a comment that she caught just barely, a joke about a server daring to touch the piano. She smiled politely and moved on, but the words stuck, a reminder of the assumptions that surrounded her. She had grown used to these quiet humiliations, to the invisible barriers that seemed to separate her from the people around her. But tonight, the thought of letting those barriers define her felt unbearable. She carried another tray across the room, balancing glasses as she moved. The guests were engaged in conversations about wealth, travel, and success, but her mind was elsewhere, caught in a swirl of memories and possibilities. She remembered the nights she had stayed up practicing, the silent applause she had given herself when she mastered a difficult piece. She remembered the moments when her music had been the only friend she had, the only voice that truly understood her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud laugh from a table nearby. One of the guests had made a joke, and the others joined in. A man glanced at her and smirked, as if to say, "This is your world, not yours." She felt the old sting of humiliation, a familiar ache she had learned to carry quietly. She kept her head high, her smile intact, and continued to serve, but the piano loomed larger in her mind, calling her to step beyond the invisible walls she had built. She passed by a group of men discussing a recent business deal. One of them leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass and glancing in her direction. "I wonder if she even knows how to play," he said, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. Laughter followed, and she felt a tightening in her chest. Yet, instead of shrinking, a small, rebellious thought took root. Maybe tonight they would learn she did more than serve drinks. Maybe tonight she would no longer be invisible. Her steps brought her near the piano once again. She stopped briefly, letting her fingers brush against the smooth wood of the piano's edge, feeling a surge of longing. Memories flooded back of the worn keys she had loved as a child, of the melodies that had flowed from her fingers, of the quiet pride she had felt when she created music from nothing. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a part of her, a piece of her soul that had remained hidden for far too long. A guest called out, asking for another drink. She moved quickly, her hand steady, her mind focused on the task at hand. Yet every glass she carried, every polite smile she offered, was shadowed by the growing desire to step forward and play. The music inside her was no longer content to remain silent. It demanded release, and she felt the tension in her chest grow stronger with each passing minute. She paused in a quieter corner, where the music of the string quartet reached her ears more clearly. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining herself at the piano. Her fingers moved in the air as if the keys were already beneath them, the notes forming a melody that told her story. She felt a rush of courage, a surge of determination that made her heart pound. The fear was still there, but it had been replaced by something stronger. A need to be seen, to be heard, to let her talent shine. As she moved through the crowd again, she noticed subtle glances from some of the guests. A few looked at her curiously, perhaps sensing the tension within her, or maybe noticing something beyond her uniform. The realization was small, almost imperceptible, but it gave her a quiet confidence. Maybe tonight, just maybe, she could step beyond the role assigned to her by the world and show them who she truly was. Her thoughts were interrupted by a young woman near the piano, who jokingly asked if anyone in the room could actually play it. Laughter followed, and she felt a familiar heat rise in her cheeks. The comment was meant to belittle, to remind her of her place. But instead of retreating, she felt a spark of defiance. One day, she thought, she would answer that question not with words, but with music. She adjusted the tray in her hands, moving carefully through the crowd, aware of the eyes that occasionally followed her. Each step was a test, a balance between her fear and her longing. She felt the weight of the invisible walls pressing in. Yet within her, a quiet resolve was building. The piano was no longer just an object in the room. It had become a symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she had kept hidden, and everything she was ready to reveal. She carried a glass of sparkling wine to a guest who barely acknowledged her presence. And as she set it down, she caught a glimpse of the reflection of herself in the polished surface of the piano. For the briefest moment, she saw not just the server, but the musician, the dreamer, the girl who had spent years perfecting her craft. The image was fleeting yet powerful. It strengthened her resolve. The evening continued, and the guests remained engrossed in their conversations. She moved through them with grace and poise, every gesture polished, every step precise. But inside, the tension had grown into something palpable, a quiet drumbeat that echoed in her chest. She knew that the moment of decision was approaching, the instant when she would have to choose between invisibility and the possibility of being seen. The thought made her hands tremble slightly, but she embraced the fear, letting it fuel the courage that had been building inside her. She found herself near the piano once more, the polished surface gleaming under the chandeliers. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, ran her fingers lightly across the edge, imagining the first note, the melody rising, the room falling silent in awe. The vision was vivid, almost tangible, and she felt a thrill that mingled with the lingering fear. The music within her demanded release, and she realized that she could no longer ignore it. The moment was coming, and she was ready to face it. The room seemed to pause, chatter fading slightly as the piano drew attention without a single note played. She felt the eyes on her, some curious, some skeptical, some dismissive. Yet the fear that had once held her back had transformed into determination. Tonight she would no longer be invisible. Tonight the music would speak for her, and the world would finally hear her voice. The quiet storm that had been building inside her was about to break, and she felt a surge of exhilaration that made her pulse race and her hands tremble with anticipation. The hum of the event had started to feel heavier, filled with polite laughter and low conversations that seemed to flow endlessly through the grand hall. She moved through the crowd, her tray steady in her hands, but her mind was elsewhere, caught between the familiar rhythm of serving and the irresistible pull of the piano in the corner. The polished black instrument seemed to watch her, silent but insistent, as if it knew her secret and called her to reveal it. Each time she passed, a wave of longing and courage washed over her, growing stronger with every glance. Earlier in the evening, she had been invisible, blending into the background unnoticed, expected to be nothing more than a server. The laughter, the whispers, the occasional smirkle reminders of the invisible walls that separated her from the world she longed to be part of. Yet now, standing with the tray in her hands, she felt a shift within herself. The desire to play, to step beyond the uniform, had grown too loud to ignore. Her heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm of her nerves and anticipation intertwining with the quiet call of the piano. A guest at a nearby table raised his glass, making a joke that carried just enough volume for her to hear. "I wonder if she even knows a note," he said, smirking as others laughed. She felt the sting, but instead of shrinking, a small spark of defiance ignited. The words no longer held power over her. She had spent years hiding her talent, practicing in silence, knowing that one day someone would have to see the real her. Maybe tonight, she thought, could be that night. As she moved carefully through the crowd, delivering drinks, her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. Each step brought her closer to the moment she had imagined countless times. The moment when her fingers would finally meet the keys and the music would speak for her. She felt the tension in her chest, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, growing with every heartbeat. The invisible walls of her world were beginning to crumble, and a new path was opening before her. A small group of guests had gathered near the piano, whispering and glancing at her. Some wore curious expressions, while others seemed skeptical, ready to dismiss anything she might attempt. She held her head high, feeling the weight of her uniform and the expectations it represented. For years she had been defined by this role, by the polite smiles and the careful movements required to serve without being noticed. Tonight she would rewrite that definition. She approached the piano slowly, each step measured, each breath deep and controlled. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the instrument, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. Memories of her childhood flooded her mind, the small room, the worn keys, the countless hours of practice and solitude. The music had always been a part of her, a companion and a confidant. And now it was calling her to share it with the world. The guests nearby began to notice her hesitation, and whispers spread through the hall. Some laughed quietly, expecting embarrassment, while others leaned forward with curiosity, sensing that something significant was about to happen. She felt a surge of courage stronger than any fear. The years of practice, the silent victories, the countless nights spent perfecting her craft, all of it had led to this moment. She was ready. With a steadying breath, she lowered the tray onto a nearby table, careful not to spill a single glass. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness alone, but from the anticipation of the music she was about to release. She adjusted her posture, straightening her back, and approached the piano with deliberate steps. Each movement was intentional, a quiet declaration that she was no longer invisible, that her time to be seen had arrived. A hush seemed to fall over the nearby guests as she drew closer. The laughter had faded, replaced by a collective curiosity that filled the room with quiet tension. Some guests exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect, while others leaned forward, eager to witness whatever was about to unfold. She felt the weight of their expectations, the scrutiny of their eyes, but it no longer intimidated her. She had faced much greater challenges alone, and now, surrounded by strangers, she was ready to reveal herself. She sat down on the piano bench, feeling the coolness of the keys beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she simply rested her hands, allowing herself to feel the connection between her and the instrument. It was a familiar sensation, a quiet reassurance that she had not forgotten her skill, that her talent was still alive and ready to bloom. The world outside the piano seemed to fade, and all that remained was the music waiting to be born. The first note came softly, hesitantly at first, like a whisper breaking the silence. She listened to it, letting it resonate, and then added another, the melody beginning to form, delicate but precise. Her fingers moved with confidence, each note carrying emotion and meaning, weaving a story that words could never convey. The guests began to quiet, drawn in by the unexpected beauty that filled the room. The music was alive, vibrant, and it spoke of something more than talent. It spoke of resilience, determination, and the courage to step beyond limitations. As the melody continued, she felt the room respond. Conversations ceased, glasses were set down, and all eyes turned toward her. The laughter and whispers that had once belittled her were replaced by a collective awe. She had transformed the space with her music, commanding attention not through words or appearances, but through the raw expression of her soul. Each note carried the story of her journey, the years of practice and perseverance, the quiet victories and the hidden dreams that had sustained her. The intensity of the music grew, filling the hall with waves of emotion. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with a fluidity that spoke of countless hours of dedication. She closed her eyes, losing herself in the melody, feeling the music rise and fall. carrying her beyond the small confines of her uniform and the invisible walls of her role. The guests were captivated, some leaning forward in disbelief, others closing their eyes to fully absorb the beauty of the performance. The room was silent, except for the music. A shared experience that transcended social status, wealth, and expectation. As the piece reached its climax, her emotions surged, and the music became a powerful declaration of her presence, her talent, and her identity. She had transformed from an unseen server into the center of attention, not through arrogance or force, but through the purity of her art. Each note resonated with honesty and vulnerability, a reflection of the years she had spent honing her craft in solitude. The hall seemed to hold its breath, caught in the spell of her performance. Recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, finally, as the last note lingered in the air, she opened her eyes to find the room completely silent. The guests were still, as if processing what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, applause began to rise, growing louder and more enthusiastic with each passing second. She looked up, taking in the expressions of awe and admiration, and felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. The invisible barriers that had once defined her world had been shattered, placed by recognition and respect. The host of the event approached, his expression a mix of surprise and admiration. He extended a hand, acknowledging her talent with genuine warmth. Guests who had previously whispered and laughed now sought to compliment her, some even asking about her musical background. She smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the applause. Tonight, she had claimed her place, not through words, but through the music that had always been a part of her. As she rose from the piano bench, the room still buzzing with excitement, she felt a quiet confidence settle within her. The journey from invisibility to recognition had begun, and she knew that this was only the first step. The music had spoken, and in doing so, it had transformed not only the perception of those around her, but also the way she saw herself. She had faced fear, doubt, and humiliation, and had emerged stronger, her talent and courage shining brightly. She moved back to her role as a server, the applause still echoing in the hall, but she no longer felt invisible. Every step she took carried the weight of her achievement, the pride of having shared her gift, and the knowledge that she had the power to redefine herself. The piano remained in the corner, a silent witness to her triumph, and she knew that it would always be a part of her story, a reminder of the night when she stepped forward, faced her fears, and let the music steal the show. The first few moments at the piano had been quiet, tentative, almost like testing the waters. But now, as she sat with her fingers poised over the keys, a sense of clarity settled over her. The music she had held inside for so long was ready to come alive. Her hands moved with confidence, flowing over the keys as if each note had always been meant to be played in this very room, in this very moment. The sound was soft at first, gentle, drawing the attention of nearby guests who leaned in. Curiosity piqued. As the melody unfolded, it became impossible to ignore. The room that had been filled with casual conversation and polite laughter grew quieter, the chatter fading into a hush of anticipation. Her music spoke without words, telling a story of patience, struggle, and quiet triumph. Each note was deliberate, precise, and full of feeling. The guests who had once dismissed her as just a server now found themselves drawn to the instrument, captivated by the beauty of her talent. Some exchanged amazed glances, their expressions betraying disbelief that someone so overlooked could possess such skill. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her without hesitation. Every chord and melody carried her emotions, the years of practice, the nights of solitude, and the hidden moments when her music had been her only friend. The room seemed to shrink around her, and for the first time, she felt fully present, fully alive, fully herself. The audience, sensing the power and authenticity of the performance, could not help but be swept along with her. The strings of their hearts seemed to vibrate with each note, the collective silence amplifying the impact of the music. She moved through the piece with a fluidity that only came from deep familiarity and a lifetime of dedication. Her fingers glided over the keys with precision, but also with passion and emotion that no amount of training could manufacture. The guests watched in awe, some holding their breath, others closing their eyes to absorb every subtle nuance. Laughter and conversation had vanished, replaced by the pure intensity of the performance. The piano, once just a beautiful object in the corner, had become a bridge between her and the audience, connecting them through sound and emotion. The melody shifted, growing more complex, layered with harmonies that seemed to weave themselves effortlessly. She allowed herself to smile subtly, feeling the exhilaration of her skill finally recognized. The confidence that had been building inside her since the moment she had noticed the piano now radiated outward, commanding attention and respect. The people who had whispered and laughed at her were now witnesses to a remarkable talent that could not be denied. Some guests leaned forward, their eyes wide, trying to catch every movement of her hands. Others were silent, lost in the music, letting it wash over them like a wave that carried away every preconceived notion of who she was. She was no longer invisible. The music had transformed her into the center of attention, the soul of the event and the embodiment of courage and determination. Every note she played told her story, but it also told a story that transcended her alone. It spoke of hidden potential, of talents unrecognized, and of the power of stepping forward despite fear. The room seemed to pulse with the energy of her playing. Her movements were precise but expressive, each note resonating with intention. The guests were silent, some even holding their hands together as if in reverence. A few reached for their phones, almost afraid to disturb the moment, hoping to capture a memory of what they were witnessing. But no recording could fully contain the depth of emotion that filled the space. It had to be experienced in real time, live and breathing, just as she was giving it. She allowed herself to feel the music, letting it carry her beyond the self-consciousness that had once held her back. Her eyes still closed, she let her emotions guide her fingers, creating subtle crescendos and decrescendos, small pauses and sudden bursts of intensity. Each movement, each note was a reflection of her journey, the years of struggle, and the quiet moments of triumph she had celebrated alone. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a voice for her inner world that had long been hidden from the eyes of the world. The applause began slowly, almost imperceptibly, as one guest leaned forward, clapping softly, then another, until the room was filled with an almost overwhelming wave of admiration and respect. She felt the vibrations of the applause as if it were another melody, harmonizing with the one she had created on the piano. The music began to fade, each note lingering in the air like a whisper, and she allowed the final chord to resonate fully before lifting her hands from the keys. Silence followed, a moment of pure awe and appreciation. Before the applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than she could have imagined, she opened her eyes to see the expressions around her, eyes wide with amazement, mouths slightly open in surprise, and faces illuminated with respect. The host of the event approached, his expression transformed from casual indifference to genuine admiration. He extended a hand, not just in congratulations, but in recognition of her talent and the courage it had taken to reveal it. Others approached as well, offering compliments, asking questions, and expressing astonishment at the skill they had underestimated. She smiled, feeling a wave of relief and accomplishment. The invisible barriers that had defined her life in this room, and perhaps in many others, had been shattered by the music that had always been a part of her. She had stepped forward, faced the doubt, shown that her worth was far greater than what her role as a server had suggested. The room, once a place of casual conversation and hidden judgments, had transformed into a space of shared awe and appreciation as she rose from the piano bench. The applause still ringing in her ears, she felt a sense of pride and satisfaction that went beyond recognition. It was a validation not only of her talent, but of the years of effort, patience, and resilience that had brought her to this moment. The music had spoken where words could not, expressing her journey, her emotions, and her triumphs in a way that no conversation or introduction could ever convey. The guests, still captivated by the performance, moved closer to offer words of admiration. Some were visibly moved, others whispered about the talent they had witnessed, and a few even confessed surprise at having underestimated her abilities. She felt the weight of their respect and the significance of the moment. Understanding that she had not only shared her gift, but had also altered perceptions, even if just for a night. The piano had been her voice, her courage made manifest, and the audience had been its witness. She returned to her duties briefly, carrying drinks with a newfound ease. Her smile was natural, no longer the polite mask of a server invisible to the world. It was the smile of someone who had claimed her place, who had shared her truth, and who had experienced the profound power of being seen for who she truly was. The room now seemed different, charged with a new energy. A recognition that one person could indeed change the atmosphere, command attention, and inspire admiration simply by stepping forward and expressing their talent, even as she continued her rounds. The applause and admiration still echoed in the corners of her mind, reinforcing the sense of accomplishment. She realized that this night would stay with her forever. A moment when courage, skill, and passion converged to create something unforgettable. The music had transformed not just the room, but herself, giving her the confidence to embrace her abilities without hesitation or fear. Every guest who had witnessed the performance would carry a memory of her music, a recognition that talent and courage could emerge from unexpected places. And she, for the first time in a long time, felt fully acknowledged, not just as a server or a quiet figure in the background, but as a musician, an artist, and a human being with a voice that demanded to be heard. The piano, once an object in the corner, had become the conduit for her dreams, her story, and her identity. And she knew that nothing would ever diminish the impact of this night or the music that had filled the room. The applause had not faded. It lingered in the air like a wave refusing to retreat. She remained near the piano, hands resting gently on the polished keys, breathing steadily as she allowed herself a moment to feel the weight and significance of what had just occurred. The room, once full of casual chatter and polite indifference, had been transformed by her music. The faces of the guests reflected awe, surprise, and a genuine admiration that left her feeling both humbled and exhilarated. She lowered herself from the piano bench slowly, adjusting her uniform, yet her posture was now more confident than it had been all evening. The invisible walls that had confined her presence seemed to have been shattered by the simple act of playing her music. She walked back toward her duties, carrying a tray, but each step felt different. She was no longer merely a server moving among guests. She had emerged as someone who commanded respect, whose presence was now recognized, whose talent could not be ignored. Guests approached her with smiles, extending congratulations and praise that felt both astonishing and deeply gratifying. Some spoke softly, almost in awe, about the unexpected beauty of her music. Others asked questions about her background, about the training that had honed such skill. She answered politely, yet she felt a warmth rising within her, a quiet pride that had nothing to do with vanity, but everything to do with finally being seen for who she truly was. The host of the event stepped forward, his earlier casual demeanor replaced by genuine admiration. He extended his hand to her, his eyes reflecting surprise and respect. "I had no idea," he said simply, and she smiled, understanding that no words could fully capture what had just occurred. The music had spoken louder than any conversation, revealing her story and her talent in a way that left no room for doubt. His acknowledgement and the recognition from the other guests confirmed that the barriers of perception had been broken. If only for this evening, a small crowd gathered around her, eager to hear more, to know her story, to witness even a fraction of the dedication that had brought her here. She felt the ripple of curiosity and admiration radiating through the room. Each interaction reinforced the reality that she had stepped beyond the role assigned to her, beyond the assumptions others had made about her abilities and her place in the world. The piano, still gleaming in the corner, seemed to stand as a silent testament to her triumph as she moved back into the rhythm of the evening. Delivering drinks with the same care and precision as before, she noticed subtle shifts in the way guests interacted with her. They no longer glanced dismissively. Their eyes lingered with interest and appreciation. Some spoke to her with genuine warmth, treating her not just as a server, but as a person whose talents and character demanded acknowledgement. The invisible veil that had cloaked her existence was gone, replaced by a recognition that she had earned through courage and skill. She paused for a moment near the piano, looking at the polished keys and recalling the hours spent practicing alone, the countless nights when music had been her solace and her companion. She remembered the fear and uncertainty that had accompanied her approach to the instrument. The doubt that had lingered like a shadow. But now, standing in a room where her music had touched hearts and shifted perceptions, she felt a profound sense of validation. She had faced her fear and emerged stronger, her talent no longer hidden, but celebrated. Guests continued to approach, some expressing curiosity about the pieces she had played, others sharing their admiration for her skill. Each interaction was a reminder that the courage to step forward had been worth every moment of hesitation and self-doubt. The recognition she received was not fleeting or superficial. It carried the weight of acknowledgement that she had long yearned for. Her music had communicated what words could not, and in doing so, had opened doors she had never imagined. The host invited her to speak briefly, to share a few words with the audience. She hesitated for a moment, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves, but then remembered the power of the music she had just shared. Words were unnecessary. Her performance had already conveyed her story. Still, she smiled and offered a few gentle words, expressing gratitude for the opportunity and for the support of those who had witnessed her talent. Her voice, though soft, carried the quiet confidence of someone who had faced a challenge and succeeded. As the evening drew on, she noticed the lasting effect her performance had on the guests. Conversations now included admiration for her, questions about her musical journey, and reflections on the surprise of witnessing talent emerge from an unexpected place. She walked among them with a sense of fulfillment, understanding that she had not only shared her music, but had also changed perceptions, challenging assumptions and inspiring appreciation for hidden abilities. The experience was transformative, both for her and for those who had observed it. Returning to the piano one final time before leaving, she ran her fingers lightly across the keys. Feeling the familiar resistance and smoothness that had been part of her life for so long, she allowed herself a private moment of reflection, remembering the years of dedication, the quiet victories, and the resilience that had brought her here. The music had been her voice, and now it had echoed through the hall, leaving an indelible impression on all who had heard it. As the night concluded, she gathered her belongings, preparing to leave the event with a sense of achievement and anticipation. The applause, the smiles, and the acknowledgement of her talent remained with her, a reminder that stepping beyond fear and doubt could lead to remarkable transformations. She walked out of the hall with her head held high, carrying not only the memories of the evening but also a newfound confidence in her abilities and her place in the world.